Listen to this amazing story of miraculous healing. Enjoy listening. Chloe ran a hand over the spine of a well-worn first edition of Dune, a faint smile playing on her lips. Her office, a cozy, book-lined sanctuary at the university, smelled of old paper and freshly brewed coffee. Outside, late autumn sunlight painted the quad in shades of gold and russet, a stark contrast to the vibrant world she was meticulously crafting within her syllabus. Speculative Fiction as a Mirror to Modern Anxieties, it was titled, a course designed to challenge, provoke, and ultimately to reveal. She believed fundamentally that stories were the architecture of human understanding, and she, Chloe, 50, literature teacher, was one of their most ardent architects. Her life was a beautifully constructed narrative of its own. There was Elias, her husband of 28 years, a retired civil engineer whose pragmatic mind anchored her often soaring intellectual flights. He was her quiet port in every storm, a man who spoke volumes in the way he always had her tea waiting, just so, when she returned from campus. Then there was Lena, their whirlwind of a daughter, 24, embarking on her own narrative as an aspiring documentary filmmaker, her spirit as free and boundless as Chloe's own had once been. And Rohan, Lena's husband, a data scientist whose quiet brilliance and steady presence were a comforting counterpoint to Lena's effervescence. They were her cherished, slightly eccentric family, the foundation upon which her intellectual pursuits thrived. A faint, nagging itch ghosted across her forearm. She scratched distractedly, attributing it to the dry air of the old building, or perhaps the wool of her favorite cardigan. It had been there for a few weeks now, a minor, almost imperceptible annoyance in her otherwise perfectly orchestrated days. She made a mental note to pick up some richer lotion later. The human condition, she mused, tapping a pen against her chin, was a complex interplay of grand ideas and minute physical discomforts. The next few weeks saw the subtle annoyance escalate into something more insistent. The itch, once a sporadic visitor, had taken up permanent residence, a relentless, insidious current beneath her skin. It became a constant companion, a low-grade hum that Chloe tried, with increasing effort, to ignore. She'd wake in the night, her skin aflame, clawing at her arms and legs until they were raw. Elias would stir beside her, murmuring, "Trouble sleeping, love?" And she'd mumble something about stress, about the ambitious syllabus, about the changing seasons. It wasn't just the sleep deprivation. The persistent pruritus began to bleed into her waking hours, a constant distraction in her beloved lectures. She found herself scratching inappropriately, subtly at first, then more overtly, during discussions on dystopian futures and utopian dreams. Her students, ever polite, pretended not to notice, but she felt their eyes. It chipped away at her focus, at her carefully constructed intellectual facade. She tried every over-the-counter cream, every antihistamine, but nothing offered more than fleeting, unsatisfactory relief. "Chloe, darling," Elias said one evening, his voice gentle but firm as he watched her rub her ankle with an almost frantic energy. They were in the living room, a half-read novel abandoned on her lap. "This isn't normal. You're scratching yourself raw. You need to see a doctor." She waved a dismissive hand. "It's just allergies, Elias. Or stress. This syllabus is more demanding than I anticipated." She hated admitting any vulnerability, especially physical. Her body was a vessel for her mind, a mere instrument. It was not supposed to betray her, but Elias, ever practical, was unyielding. "Allergies don't make you look like you've wrestled a badger every morning. Call Dr. Henderson. Please, Chloe, for my peace of mind, if nothing else." Reluctantly, Chloe agreed. Dr. Henderson, her long-standing GP, ran a battery of tests. Blood work, skin prick tests, everything came back frustratingly normal. "Perhaps a dermatologist, Chloe?" she suggested, her brow furrowed. The dermatologist, equally baffled, prescribed stronger antihistamines and specialized lotions. They did nothing. The itch persisted, a silent, unseen current dragging her deeper into an unfamiliar sea of discomfort. Frustration mounted, a slow, simmering anger at her own body, at the medical establishment that couldn't offer an explanation. Apprehension began to gnaw at the edges of her composure. This wasn't just an annoyance anymore. It was a threat, an uninvited guest disrupting the harmony of her life. The unwritten chapter began with a phone call from Dr. Henderson, her voice grave. "Chloe, we need to do some more targeted imaging. Your liver enzymes are slightly elevated, and given the persistent itching, I want to rule out a few things. I've scheduled an MRI for tomorrow morning." The MRI led to an ERCP, a more invasive procedure, and the waiting began. Those days were a blur of hushed conversations, Elias's worried glances, Lena's frantic internet searches for obscure conditions. Chloe tried to immerse herself in her books, but the words blurred, the narratives failing to hold her attention. The itch was a constant, searing reminder that something was fundamentally wrong. The day of the diagnosis, the doctor, a young, earnest gastroenterologist, spoke with a practiced solemnity that chilled Chloe to the bone. He sat across from her and Elias, a sheaf of papers in his hand, his gaze direct, yet strangely detached. "Mrs. Miller," he began, his voice soft but clear, "the ERCP revealed a mass in your bile duct. The biopsy results confirm it's cholangiocarcinoma, and the MRI indicates early liver metastasis." Cholangiocarcinoma, the word hung in the air, heavy and unfamiliar. Bile duct cancer. Early liver metastasis. The clinical terms felt like blows, each one landing with brutal precision. She felt a strange detachment, as if she were observing a scene from a poorly written play. "Given the aggressive nature of this cancer and its advanced stage at diagnosis," the doctor continued, his words falling like stones into a silent well, "the prognosis is grim. We can discuss palliative chemotherapy, but I'm afraid the best course of action at this point is for you to prepare your affairs." Prepare your affairs. The phrase echoed in her mind, a death knell. Not fight, not hope, but prepare. It was a sentence delivered with polite regret, dismissing her entire existence, her carefully constructed intellectual world, her family, her future, as if it were nothing more than a failed experiment. Elias's hand found hers, squeezing so tightly it hurt. His face was a mask of quiet, stoic despair, his eyes, usually so clear and steady, clouded with unshed tears. When they told Lena, her initial reaction was a desperate, almost manic energy. She launched into a frantic search for alternative treatments, experimental trials, anything that might contradict the doctor's pronouncement. "There has to be something else, Mom. They can't just give up," she cried, her voice cracking. Chloe, however, felt only a profound shock, a devastating disbelief. Her body, the reliable vessel for her brilliant mind, had betrayed her. Terror, cold and absolute, began to seep into her bones. The itching, once merely an annoyance, now felt like a cruel, physical manifestation of the cancer's insidious presence, a constant reminder of the invader within. She, the architect of worlds, suddenly found herself without a blueprint, without a future, staring into an abyss she had never imagined. This unwritten chapter was not one she had ever intended to create. He was her quiet port in every storm, a man who spoke volumes in the way he always had her tea waiting when she stumbled in, exhausted after a late lecture. Then there was Lena, their daughter, a whirlwind of creative energy, currently pursuing her dream of documentary filmmaking, her vibrant spirit a constant source of joy and occasional exasperation. And Rohan, Lena's quiet, brilliant husband, a data scientist whose calm intellect often mirrored Chloe's own, albeit in a different discipline. Their lives were interwoven, a tapestry of shared meals, intellectual debates, and the comforting rhythm of everyday existence. Lately, however, a discordant thread had begun to appear in this otherwise harmonious weave. It started subtly, a barely noticeable prickle on her skin, dismissed initially as dry air or a new detergent. But over the past few weeks, it had escalated, morphing from an occasional annoyance to a persistent, maddening itch. It wasn't localized. It seemed to crawl across her entire body, worse at night, disrupting her precious sleep. She'd tried everything, lotions, antihistamines, even switching to unscented soaps, all to no avail. Tonight, as she sat grading papers, her pen hovering over a particularly insightful essay on dystopia, the sensation became almost unbearable. Her skin felt alive with an invisible torment, an unseen current beneath the surface. She scratched reflexively, then more vigorously, leaving angry red welts on her forearm. "You're going to abrade your skin, love," Elias murmured, emerging from the kitchen, a mug of chamomile tea in hand. He watched her with concern, his brow furrowed. "Are you sure it's just allergies? It's been weeks now, Chloe." She sighed, dropping her pen. "I don't know, Elias. It's relentless. I feel like I'm crawling out of my skin." She rubbed her temples, exhaustion finally catching up to her. The itch wasn't just physical. It was starting to fray her nerves, making it difficult to focus, stealing her concentration. Her usually sharp intellect felt dulled, shrouded in a fog of discomfort. Even the thought of delving into her beloved speculative fiction felt like an insurmountable task. "That's it," Elias said, his voice firm but gentle. "I'm calling Dr. Henderson first thing in the morning. This isn't normal, Chloe." She wanted to argue, to dismiss his concern, but the truth was she was tired of it too. The persistent pruritus had become an unwelcome, insidious companion, stealing her sleep, distracting her during lectures, and now even making it hard to find joy in her books. It was a constant, low-grade torment, a physical manifestation of something amiss that she couldn't quite grasp. The initial visit to Dr. Henderson yielded little. "It sounds like a severe allergic reaction," the kind elderly doctor had said, prescribing stronger antihistamines and a steroid cream. When those offered no relief, she was referred to a dermatologist, then an allergist. Each appointment was a frustrating cycle of questions, examinations, and inconclusive tests. Blood work came back largely normal, though the liver enzymes showed a slight, unexplained elevation that none of the specialists seemed particularly concerned about. "Could be a viral infection," one suggested casually, "or just stress." Stress. Chloe scoffed. She thrived on intellectual stimulation, on the vibrant chaos of her classroom. Her life was orderly, fulfilling, but as the weeks bled into months and the itching escalated to a tormenting frenzy, accompanied now by a subtle yellowing of her eyes and skin, and an unsettling darkening of her urine, even she couldn't deny that something was profoundly wrong. The pale, almost clay-colored stools she'd observed lately, coupled with a bewildering loss of appetite and a noticeable drop in weight, sent a ripple of genuine fear through her. Elias, ever vigilant, noticed it too. His quiet insistence for more definitive answers grew louder. "They're sending me for an MRI next week," Chloe told Elias one evening, her voice flat. The fatigue was overwhelming now, a heavy cloak that draped over her every movement, every thought. The relentless itching had etched itself into her very being, a constant, irritating hum beneath her skin. The MRI led to an ERCP, an endoscopic retrograde cholangiopancreatography, a procedure that sounded as invasive as it felt. The doctor, a young, earnest gastroenterologist named Dr. Ramirez, had a kind face, but his eyes held a weariness that spoke of difficult conversations. He called her into his office a week later, Elias by her side, holding her hand so tightly it almost hurt. "Chloe," Dr. Ramirez began, his voice soft but direct, "the ERCP revealed an obstruction in your bile duct. We took biopsies. The pathology results, they confirm our suspicions." He paused, taking a breath. "It's cholangiocarcinoma, bile duct cancer." The words hung in the air, heavy, suffocating. Chloe felt a sudden, dizzying lurch in her stomach, as if the floor had dropped out beneath her. She heard Elias suck in a sharp breath beside her. "There's also some early metastasis to the liver," Dr. Ramirez continued, his gaze unwavering. "It's an aggressive form of cancer, Chloe, and unfortunately, due to its location and the late stage of diagnosis, the prognosis is grim." He looked directly at her, his voice softening even further. "I'm deeply sorry. You need to prepare your affairs." Prepare your affairs, the phrase echoed in her mind, a death knell. It wasn't a medical term, not truly. It was a command, a stark statement of finality. Her brilliant mind, so accustomed to dissecting complex literary narratives, struggled to process this brutal, unvarnished truth. Cancer. cholangiocarcinoma, liver metastasis. It felt like something out of a bad novel, a plot twist she hadn't written, couldn't possibly write. Betrayal. Her own body, this vessel of intellect and experience, had betrayed her. Elias squeezed her hand tighter, his knuckles white. He said nothing, his face a mask of shock and a quiet, profound despair. But from the corner of her eye, Chloe saw a single tear trace a path down his weathered cheek. The news hit Lena like a physical blow. She burst into tears, then immediately swung into action, pulling out her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard. No, this can't be right. There has to be something. Alternative treatments, clinical trials, anything. Her voice rose with each desperate query, a frantic hope battling against the crushing reality. Rohan, ever the quiet anchor, put an arm around Lena, his own eyes wide with shock. But his gaze remained on Chloe, a silent sorrow radiating from him. Chloe just sat there, numb, the words replaying in her head like a broken record. Prepare your affairs. The itch which had driven her to this point now seemed insignificant, a mere whisper compared to the deafening roar of the diagnosis. Her meticulously constructed narrative, her ordered world of stories and ideas, had just been ripped apart, leaving her adrift in a terrifying, unwritten chapter. The architect of worlds found herself staring into a void. It seemed to crawl across her entire body, most intensely at night, turning the familiar comfort of her bed into a landscape of torment. She'd tried everything: oatmeal baths, antihistamines, even, at Elias's suggestion, a new unscented lotion. Nothing worked. It was more than just an itch now. It was an unseen current, tugging at the edges of her concentration, a static hum beneath the symphony of her life. The last few weeks had dissolved into a blur of appointments. Elias had insisted, his patience finally worn thin by her increasingly agitated nocturnal scratching. "Chloe, this isn't normal," he'd said, his voice firm but gentle. "You need to see someone." She'd relented, more to quiet his worry than her own, still convinced it was some fleeting, stress-induced allergy. First, the dermatologist, who'd shrugged, prescribed a stronger cream and suggested stress management. Then her family doctor, who'd ordered a battery of blood tests, assuring her it was probably nothing serious, just a persistent allergic reaction. But the tests came back with a few red flags. Elevated liver enzymes, markers she didn't understand, but which seemed to concern the doctor enough to refer her to a gastroenterologist. More tests, ultrasounds, then a CT scan. Each step felt like a slow, deliberate tightening of an invisible noose. The itching, meanwhile, had escalated to a maddening frenzy, accompanied now by a subtle darkening of her urine, and more unsettlingly, a pale, almost clay-like quality to her stools. The weight loss she'd initially attributed to stress and lost appetite was becoming noticeable, her clothes hanging a little looser. The appointment with the gastroenterologist, Dr. Sharma, was etched into her memory, not for any dramatic pronouncements, but for the quiet, almost apologetic way he delivered the news. The room was sterile, the air thick with unspoken dread. Elias sat beside her, his hand a solid anchor on her knee. Lena, who'd insisted on coming, fidgeted nervously in her chair. "Chloe," Dr. Sharma began, his gaze steady, "the MRI and the ERCP confirmed our suspicions. You have a mass in your bile duct. The biopsies indicate it's cholangiocarcinoma." The word hung in the air, foreign yet instantly terrifying. Chloe, the architect of words, found herself utterly bereft of them. Her mind, usually a rapid-fire processor of information, stalled. Dr. Sharma continued, his voice a low monotone, detailing the grim specifics. "It's aggressive, and it has metastasized early to a small part of your liver." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Given its location and the spread, surgical removal isn't an option." Chloe felt a chilling detachment, as if she were observing the scene from a great distance. She heard phrases like poor prognosis, limited treatment options, managed symptoms. But the one that truly pierced the fog, echoing with a brutal finality, was, "We recommend you prepare your affairs." Lena gasped, a small, choked sound that snapped Chloe back to the horrifying reality. "No!" Lena cried, her voice rising in a desperate crescendo. "No, that can't be right. There has to be something. Another opinion, a different treatment, anything." Her eyes, usually so bright with artistic energy, were wide with a frantic, almost unhinged hope. She pulled out her phone, already muttering about experimental therapies, alternative clinics, a desperate search for a loophole in the unwritten chapter of Chloe's life. Elias, by contrast, remained silent, his grip on Chloe's knee tightening to the point of pain. His face, normally a canvas of quiet pragmatism, was now a mask of profound, stoic despair. His eyes, usually so clear and steady, were clouded, reflecting a grief so deep it seemed to have no outlet. He looked at Chloe, and in his gaze she saw not just his fear, but a shared world crumbling around them. Chloe felt a cold, creeping sensation, a profound terror that went beyond the physical. It wasn't just the pain, or the itching, or the knowledge that her body was betraying her. It was the sudden, brutal realization that her story, the meticulously crafted narrative of her life, was about to end abruptly, unfairly, and without a proper conclusion. The unwritten chapter, it seemed, was already being dictated, and she had no say in its plot. The thought of all the stories she would never read, the ideas she would never explore, the lessons she would never teach, was a worse agony than any physical symptom. Her mind, her very essence, felt under siege. The stark white of the chemotherapy suite became Chloe's new normal, a chilling contrast to the vibrant hues of her classroom. The first cycle hit her like a physical blow. The nausea was relentless, a churning abyss in her stomach that made even the thought of water unbearable. Her appetite vanished, and the slight academic frame she'd always carried began to waste away. The persistent pruritus, far from receding, seemed to intensify, a constant, maddening reminder of the poison coursing through her veins. It was as if her body, already under siege, was actively rejecting the very chemicals meant to save it. "It's just the initial shock to your system, Chloe," Dr. Anya Sharma, her oncologist, had said, her voice a soothing balm that barely penetrated the fog of misery. "We'll adjust the antiemetics. Keep trying to eat small, bland meals." But small, bland meals felt like a cruel joke when her stomach rebelled at the smell of toast. Radiation, added in the second cycle, brought its own distinct torment. Her skin, already sensitive from the itching, developed angry red burns at the treatment sites. The fatigue was profound, a leaden weight that pressed her into the mattress for hours, days. Sleep, when it came, was fitful, punctuated by vivid, disturbing dreams and the insistent, crawling sensation on her skin. The real agony, however, was not purely physical. It was the intellectual paralysis. Her mind, once a vibrant landscape of ideas and prose, was now a barren wasteland. The complex literary theories, the nuanced character analyses, the sheer joy of losing herself in a beautifully crafted sentence, all of it had receded, replaced by a dull ache, a constant buzz of discomfort. She tried to read, to escape into the world she so loved, but the words blurred, the narratives refused to cohere. Even the simplest paragraph felt like traversing a vast, intellectual desert. The yellow tinge to her skin deepened, a visible sign of her failing liver, and it felt like a physical manifestation of her own dimming light. Jaundice, a word she taught her students in the context of Victorian novels, was now her reality, a sickly yellow mirror reflecting back her own dissolution. She watched helpless as her meticulously planned syllabus for the eschatology of speculative fiction gathered dust on her desk. The thought of standing before a class, articulating complex ideas, felt not just daunting, but impossible. Her identity, so inextricably linked to her intellect, to her role as a teacher, was eroding with each excruciating treatment. She wasn't Chloe, the literature teacher, anymore. She was Chloe, the patient, defined by her illness, her pain. The sense of losing herself, of her very essence being siphoned away by the cancer in its brutal cure, was a despair far deeper than any physical discomfort. Elias, ever the rock, sat by her bedside holding her hand, reading aloud from her favorite authors, his voice a steady drone that sometimes lulled her into a brief, shallow sleep. He'd bring her lukewarm broth, cajole her into taking her pills, his presence a quiet, unwavering comfort. But even his stoicism couldn't pierce the wall of her misery. Lena, frantic and buzzing with a desperate energy, would bombard her with articles about experimental treatments, alternative diets, meditation gurus. "Mom, you have to try this herbal tea. It boosts liver function," she'd exclaim, her eyes bright with a hope Chloe couldn't share. Chloe would just turn her head away, too exhausted to articulate the futility she felt. She appreciated their efforts, their love, but it felt like they were speaking a language she no longer understood, from a world she no longer inhabited, the world of health, of possibility, of a future. Her world had shrunk to the four walls of her bedroom and the ever-present throb of her pain. She was a poisoned well, her intellectual waters stagnant, her spiritual source drying up, and she felt utterly, irrevocably alone in its depths. The days blurred into a monotonous cycle of appointments, treatments, and the crushing weight of exhaustion. Chloe's once vibrant skin had taken on a sickly yellow hue, the jaundice deepening with each passing week, a vivid external manifestation of the internal chaos. Her urine was the color of strong tea, her stools unnervingly pale, confirming what her body screamed at her. Her liver was failing. The chemotherapy, far from offering the promised reprieve, seemed to be accelerating her decline. The constant nausea had given way to a gnawing, pervasive ache that settled deep in her bones. And the pruritus, that insidious itch, was now a torment beyond imagination. Its relentless demand for attention making sleep a distant memory. Dr. Sharma, her face etched with a concern she tried to mask, delivered the news with a carefully modulated voice. "Chloe, the markers, they're not responding as we'd hoped. Your liver function is declining. We're seeing signs of increased obstruction and the metastasis. It's progressed slightly despite the current regimen." The words were clinical, detached, but Chloe heard the silent addendum. "We're losing the battle." The doctor spoke of adjusting dosages, exploring new combinations, but it felt like rearranging deck chairs on a sinking ship. Chloe felt herself receding, pulling away from the world, from her family. Lena, ever the optimist, would bring her articles about experimental therapies, miracle diets, spiritual healers in distant lands. "Mom, what about this clinic in Mexico? They use hyperthermia and natural compounds. Or this meditation guru who claims to cure cancer with sound waves." Lena's voice was a desperate, hopeful current, but Chloe felt only a cold, intellectual cynicism. The very notion of positive thinking felt like a cruel joke, a simplistic platitude offered by those who had never truly stared into the abyss of their own mortality. She, Chloe, the architect of worlds, who had taught her students to dissect narratives and question every assumption, found herself utterly devoid of faith. Not in a religious deity, that had never been her domain, but in the grand narrative of human resilience, in the power of intellect to overcome, to adapt, to triumph. Her mind, once her greatest ally, now felt like a prison, replaying the doctor's grim pronouncements, cataloging her body's betrayals. Elias, stoic and quiet, would sit by her bedside, holding her hand, his presence a steady anchor in a churning sea. He'd bring her weak tea, read aloud from her favorite novels, his voice a low rumble. But Chloe couldn't listen. The words blurred, losing their meaning. How could she engage with the intricate dance of plot and character when her own plot was so brutally simple, a downward spiral, unredeemable? His quiet comfort, once so grounding, now felt suffocating. She wanted to scream, to lash out at their hope, at their relentless, naive optimism. "Don't you see?" she wanted to cry. "I'm already gone. This is just the slow, agonizing fade to black." One afternoon the phone rang, Lena's voice bright with a forced cheerfulness that grated on Chloe's nerves. "Mom, I found something. It's an art therapy collective for people going through what you are. It's really small, very supportive. And guess what? It's run by a former student of yours, Sarah Jenkins. Remember her? She was in your mythology and modern fiction class, then went to nursing school. She's working in palliative care now. Chloe turned her head away from the phone, the effort monumental. Lena, please, I can barely breathe, let alone paint a still life of my dying liver. Her voice was a raspy whisper, laced with an exhaustion that went beyond the physical. No, Mom, it's not like that. Sarah said it's very unstructured, just a space to express. And it's not about painting pretty pictures, it's about finding a different way to process. Please, just one session. For me? For Sarah? Lena's voice cracked slightly, a hint of desperation seeping through her determined optimism. Chloe closed her eyes, the familiar wave of nausea washing over her. The thought of leaving the house, of facing other suffering souls, felt unbearable. But Lena's plea, the subtle tremor in her voice, chipped away at Chloe's resolve. Her daughter was trying so hard, so desperately, to find her a lifeline. And Sarah? Sarah had been a bright, sensitive student, with an unusual artistic bent for a literature major. Perhaps for Lena, and for the ghost of an intellectual connection, she could try. Fine, Chloe rasped, the single word an admission of utter defeat, a concession to her daughter's relentless love rather than any spark of hope within herself. One session, don't expect miracles. She knew with a chilling certainty that the only miracle left to her was the swift, merciful end to this protracted decline. The sterile scent of the hospital became a bitter perfume, clinging to Chloe's clothes, her hair, even the taste in her mouth. Each breath felt shallow, each movement an effort. The weight of her own body, once a familiar vessel for her intellect, now felt like a crushing burden. She no longer went to the window, the outside world a blur of indifferent life she felt profoundly disconnected from. Her beloved books lay untouched on her nightstand, their pages mocking her with the promise of worlds she could no longer inhabit. The words blurred, the narratives lost their thread, and the intellectual spark that had defined her, that had fueled her very existence, flickered precariously, threatening to extinguish completely. Mom, you should try to eat something, Lena pleaded, her voice thin with worry, holding out a spoon of lukewarm broth. Chloe merely turned her head, the effort monumental. Or maybe just a little water? Chloe managed a weak, dismissive gesture. What's the point, Lena? It just comes back up. It's all pointless. The words were raspy, a reflection of the dryness in her throat and the desiccation of her spirit. She saw the familiar flicker of hurt in Lena's eyes, followed by a determined set of her jaw. Lena, ever the optimist, refused to let go of hope, even as Chloe felt herself drowning in despair. Elias, quieter than ever, would sit by her bedside, holding her hand, his thumb tracing absent patterns on her skin. He didn't try to cajole her into eating or offer platitudes. He just was there, a steady, unwavering presence in the turbulent sea of her illness. His silence was comforting in its own way, a testament to a love that transcended words. But even his stoicism couldn't pierce the thick shroud of cynicism that had descended upon Chloe. "This isn't working, Elias," she'd whispered one night, the jaundice making her eyes glow with an eerie yellow in the dim light. "The doctors, they're just prolonging the inevitable. They're poisoning me slowly, making me suffer more." Her voice was devoid of emotion, a flat declaration of surrender. He squeezed her hand. "They're trying, Chloe. They're doing everything they can." "Are they?" She scoffed, a bitter, dry sound. "Or are they just following a protocol? A checklist? There's no human element here, Elias. No understanding of the suffering, just numbers on a chart. My liver markers, my bilirubin. It's all just data points to them." She felt a profound sense of betrayal, not just by her body, but by the very institutions she had always believed in. Science, medicine, the relentless human pursuit of knowledge. It all felt hollow now, meaningless in the face of her own deterioration. Lena, however, was undeterred by Chloe's despondency. She spent hours on her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard, a whirlwind of research and desperate hope. "Mom, listen to this," she burst in one afternoon, holding up her tablet. "It's an art therapy collective for people with advanced illnesses. It's small, experimental. But it's run by a former student of yours, I think. A literature student. Evelyn Hayes? Do you remember her? Chloe's mind, sluggish and clouded, struggled to retrieve the memory. Evelyn Hayes, a bright, quiet girl, passionate about poetry, who had gone on to pursue nursing. The name stirred a faint, almost forgotten echo. Evelyn? Yes, I think so. What about it? She asked, her voice flat, anticipating another futile suggestion. She's a palliative care nurse now, and she runs this group. It's not about curing, Mom, but about expression, about finding meaning. Please, just try it. It's not a clinic, it's a community center. They have art supplies, music. Just talk to her. For me? Lena's blue eyes, so much like her own, welled up with unshed tears. Chloe sighed, the familiar weariness washing over her. The thought of leaving the confines of her bedroom, of interacting with strangers, filled her with dread. She had no desire to express anything. Her inner world felt like a barren wasteland, utterly devoid of creativity or meaning. Yet the desperation in Lena's voice, the raw vulnerability, tugged at something deep within her. It was a plea, not just for her to get better, but for her to simply try, for Lena's sake. Fine, Chloe croaked, the word a reluctant concession. One session, if it's too much, we leave. Lena's face lit up, a beacon in Chloe's deepening gloom. Thank you, Mom. Thank you. A few days later, Elias helped Chloe into the car, her movements slow and labored. The short drive to the community center felt like an epic journey. The building, a converted old schoolhouse, was surprisingly cheerful, with colorful murals on the walls and the faint scent of paint and clay in the air. Evelyn Hayes was waiting for them, her face kind and calm, her eyes holding a deep understanding that instantly disarmed Chloe's defenses. Professor Davies, Evelyn said, her voice soft, her smile genuine. It's an honor to see you again, and thank you for coming. She led them into a large sunlit room filled with easels, pottery wheels, and tables laden with art supplies. A few other patients, frail like Chloe, sat quietly, some sketching, others molding clay. Chloe's gaze swept across the room, her skepticism firmly in place. This was futile. What could a paintbrush or a lump of clay offer in the face of liver failure and metastasizing cancer? Her eyes, jaundiced and weary, landed on a young man hunched over a large drawing tablet in a corner. He was intensely focused, his brow furrowed in concentration. He looked barely out of his teens, his skin pale, almost translucent, and his head was shaved, revealing a prominent scar near his temple. His hands, surprisingly steady, moved with a practiced fluidity, sketching rapid lines. Evelyn, noticing Chloe's gaze, offered a quiet explanation. That's Cale. He's 20. Diagnosed with a rare bone marrow cancer. He's incredibly talented. He's working on a graphic novel. Graphic novel. The words resonated, cutting through the haze of Chloe's despair with a faint echo of intellectual curiosity. A story. Even in this sterile, despairing landscape, someone was trying to tell a story. Kyle. The name floated in her mind, an unconventional muse in an utterly unconventional setting. Chloe felt a stir, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor in the intellectual landscape of her mind. She hadn't realized how starved she was for something, anything, that wasn't about her illness. What's the point, Lena? Chloe's voice was a rough whisper, barely audible above the rhythmic beep of the IV pump. The broth, a pale ghost of sustenance, held no appeal. The very thought of food churned her stomach. Her world had shrunk to the confines of her hospital bed, a sterile cell where her body waged a losing battle. The frustration was a hot, bitter taste in her mouth. Lena, bless her heart, was a whirlwind of desperate hope, a constant stream of articles about obscure therapies, esoteric diets, and now this art therapy collective. Mom, please, just try it. It's different. And it's run by Sarah, remember? Your old student? She's a palliative care nurse now, and she says it's really helped some patients find a sense of peace. Lena's eyes, bright with unshed tears, pleaded with her. Chloe sighed, the sound rattling in her chest. Peace? The concept felt as alien as a foreign language. Her mind, once a bustling metropolis of ideas, was now a desolate landscape, populated only by the gnawing pain and the relentless itch that had become her constant companion. "Lena, I'm a literature teacher, not a painter. What am I supposed to do, sculpt my despair?" The sarcasm was brittle, a thin defense against the rising tide of despair. "No, Mom, it's not like that. It's about expression, about finding a different way to process things. Sarah said there's a young man there, Kyle. He's creating a graphic novel about his story. She thought you two might connect." Lena pressed, her voice gentle but firm. A graphic novel? That piqued a flicker of interest, a tiny spark in the intellectual wasteland. Chloe had always championed the expansion of literary forms, even graphic novels, as valid and powerful storytelling vehicles. But the idea of engaging, of connecting with anyone, felt utterly exhausting. Still, Lena's desperation was palpable, and Chloe, despite her anger and desolation, couldn't bear to add to her daughter's burdens. "Fine," she croaked, closing her eyes. "One session, but don't expect miracles." The collective met in a bright, airy room at a local community center, a stark contrast to the hospital's sterile confines. Easels stood against the walls, trays of paints and colored pencils lay scattered on tables, and soft instrumental music played in the background. A small group of patients, each bearing the invisible yet undeniable marks of their struggles, sat around a large table. Sarah, warm and empathetic, greeted Chloe with a gentle hug. "Chloe, it's so good to see you. I'm so sorry about everything." Chloe offered a weak smile. Her eyes, still clouded by jaundice, scanned the room. And then she saw him. He was perched on a stool in a corner, hunched over a large sketchbook, his fingers rapidly sketching. Kyle. He looked impossibly frail, his skin almost translucent, but there was an intensity in his dark eyes that belied his physical weakness. A shock of unruly black hair framed a face that looked far older than his 20 years. He wore a worn band t-shirt, and his arms, visible beneath rolled-up sleeves, were impossibly thin, yet his hands moved with a surprising strength and precision. Sarah introduced them. Kyle merely nodded, his gaze returning to his sketchbook, but not before Chloe caught a glimpse of what he was drawing. A fantastical cityscape, crumbling and ravaged, with skeletal figures wandering through the ruins. There was a raw, visceral power to his lines, a stark beauty in the desolation he depicted. Kyle is working on a graphic novel, Sarah explained, her voice soft. It's about his journey, and, well, about facing the end. Chloe felt a jolt. Facing the end. The unvarnished truth of it hung in the air between them. Kyle didn't shy away from it, didn't cloak it in euphemisms. He was confronting it head-on with a pen and paper. For the first hour, Chloe sat silently observing. She felt like an anthropologist in a foreign land, detached, analytical. She watched as others painted abstract emotions or sculpted small, misshapen figures. Her own hands felt heavy, useless. The itch, a dull throb beneath her skin, refused to be ignored. Then during a break, Kyle looked up from his work, his intense gaze falling on Chloe. "You teach literature, right?" His voice was surprisingly deep, raspy but clear. Chloe nodded. "I did. Before..." She trailed off, the implicit meaning hanging heavy. "Sarah told me. She said you specialized in narrative structures, character development." He gestured to his sketchbook. "I'm struggling with the arc of my protagonist. He's me, of course, but I need him to be more than just a self-portrait. He needs to resonate, to carry the weight of something universal, and the pacing, I feel like I'm rushing to the end." A flicker of frustration crossed his face. Chloe felt a familiar stir, a long dormant part of her intellect awakening. This was her terrain. This was where she excelled. The academic, the critic, the teacher began to re-emerge from the fog of illness. "The rush to the end is understandable," she said, her voice still weak, but gaining a shade of its former authority. "But a powerful narrative often finds its strength not in the finish line, but in the journey, in the small, pivotal moments of realization, of defiance, even of surrender. What is your protagonist learning about himself, about the world, in these final moments? Cale put down his pen, his eyes fixed on her. He's learning that the world keeps turning, even when you're not in it. That art, it's a way to leave a footprint, a scream maybe, that echoes after the silence. And what kind of scream is it? Chloe pressed, her mind already analyzing, dissecting. Is it one of rage, of sorrow, of acceptance? The nuance of that scream will define your character, Cale. He stared at her, a slow smile spreading across his face, lighting up his gaunt features. You get it. I do, Chloe replied, a fragile sense of purpose unfurling within her. Tell me about your protagonist. What are his deepest fears, his most profound hopes, even in the face of oblivion? And so, surrounded by the quiet hum of creative energy, Chloe and Cale began to talk. Not about their illnesses, not about prognoses or treatments, but about story, about character, about the delicate balance of light and shadow, hope and despair. Chloe found herself offering critiques, suggesting alternative narrative choices, helping Cale to flesh out not just his protagonist, but the allegorical figures that populated his crumbling cityscape. She talked about the power of myth, the universality of the hero's journey, even when the journey ended not in triumph, but in acceptance. In turn, Cale, with his raw honesty and fiercely intelligent perspective, challenged Chloe's own cynicism. He spoke of the beauty he found in the fleeting nature of life, the clarity that impending death brought to his artistic vision. You spend your life building worlds with word, he said one afternoon, his eyes fixed on hers. But isn't the ultimate creation the way you choose to live in the one you're given, even when it's falling apart? Chloe had no immediate answer. His words, sharp and insightful, cut through her intellectual armor, forcing her to confront her own detachment. She had analyzed life through texts, but had she truly lived it? The hours she spent with Cale, initially a reluctant concession to Lena, became a sanctuary. The art room, once a place she viewed with skepticism, transformed into a vibrant intellectual forge. The gnawing itch, the constant nausea, the pervasive fatigue, they didn't vanish, but they receded, pushed to the periphery by the sheer force of her engagement. For the first time in months, Chloe felt not like a patient, a dying woman, but like herself again, a teacher, a mentor, an intellectual sparring partner. She was no longer just preparing to die. She was actively, intensely, creatively helping to bring a new world into being, one panel at a time. The symbiotic canvas of Cale's graphic novel was becoming a space where both their spirits, in their own unique ways, found a profound, almost desperate connection. What's the point, Lena? Chloe's voice was a rough whisper, barely audible above the rhythmic beep of the IV pump. The broth, a pale ghost of sustenance, held no appeal. The very thought of food churned her stomach. Her world had shrunk to the confines of her hospital bed, a sterile cell where her body waged a losing battle. The frustration was a hot, bitter taste in her mouth. Lena, bless her heart, was a whirlwind of desperate hope, a constant stream of articles about obscure therapies, esoteric diets, and now this art therapy collective. Mom, please, just try it. It's different. And it's run by Sarah, remember? Your old student? She's a palliative care nurse now, and she says it's really helped some patients find a sense of peace. Lena's eyes, bright with unshed tears, pleaded with her. Chloe sighed, the sound rattling in her chest. Peace. The concept felt as alien as a foreign language. Her mind, once a bustling metropolis of ideas, was now a desolate landscape, populated by shadows and the omnipresent throb of pain. Yet the memory of Sarah, a bright, earnest student who had once written a brilliant essay on the symbiotic relationship between text and reader, flickered, a tiny spark. Fine, Chloe rasped, the single word costing her more energy than an hour of teaching. But don't expect miracles. And so Chloe found herself in the quiet, sun-drenched room of the Art Therapy Collective. The smell of paint and clay, a welcome change from the hospital's antiseptic sting, hung in the air. Sarah, her face older, marked by the quiet wisdom of her profession, greeted Chloe with a gentle smile and a hug that felt surprisingly grounding. It was there, amidst the canvases and sculpting tools, that Chloe first saw Cale. He was perched on a stool, rail-thin, his skin translucent, but his eyes, those were alive, fiercely intelligent, cynical, and alight with an almost manic creative energy. He was sketching furiously in a large, worn sketchbook, the pages filled with dynamic, raw, and profoundly unsettling images. Cale, as it turned out, was crafting a graphic novel. Not just any graphic novel, but one about his impending death, a visceral exploration of his rare bone marrow cancer, rendered with a brutal honesty that both repelled and fascinated Chloe. He was a whirlwind of dark humor and piercing insight, his intellect a sharp blade cutting through the saccharine platitudes that often surrounded the terminally ill. Chloe, initially observing, found herself drawn into his orbit. She began to offer feedback, her literary mind, long dormant, stirring back to life. She helped him refine his narrative, suggesting character arcs for his personified symptoms, discussing thematic depth in his choice of color palettes. In turn, Cale, seeing past her illness to the sharp mind beneath, challenged her intellectual cynicism. He pushed her to see beauty in the fleeting, meaning in the transient, to find the story even in the silence of an ending. Their collaboration became consuming. Hours melted away as they discussed panels, dialogue, and symbolism. For the first time in months, Chloe's thoughts weren't consumed by the insidious march of her disease. The constant itching, the dull ache in her side, the pervasive fatigue, they receded, footnotes to the vibrant, urgent narrative they were building together. She found herself laughing, truly laughing, for the first time since her diagnosis, at Cale's mordant wit. He was a kindred spirit, a fellow architect of worlds, albeit ones far more bleak than her usual literary landscapes. The intellectual stimulation was a powerful analgesic, a mental cocoon that shielded her from the relentless physical assault. Elias and Lena, watching her from a distance, saw a flicker of the old Chloe return, a faint spark in the eyes that had been so dull with despair. But even the most intense creative fire could not hold back the inevitable. Cale's condition, like a story reaching its inexorable climax, took a sharp turn for the worse. The vibrant energy that had sustained him began to dim. His sketches grew weaker, his voice a whisper. He was hospitalized, the sterile scent returning to haunt Chloe with a vengeance. She spent hours at his bedside, the rhythmic beeping of the machines a grim counterpoint to their hushed conversations. "The final chapter, Professor," Cale rasped one afternoon, his eyes fixed on the ceiling, already seeing the panels in his mind. The protagonist, he confronts the void. But what does he leave behind? Chloe's throat tightened. Her own body felt leaden, heavy with grief and exhaustion. The emotional strain was immense, a crushing weight that triggered a critical flare-up of her own symptoms. Her jaundice deepened, her skin a sickly yellow, and the persistent pruritus returned with a vengeance, an internal fire that no amount of scratching could assuage. Her liver, already struggling, felt like a bruised, angry organ. The doctors, seeing her deterioration, spoke in hushed tones about palliative care, their words a chilling echo of the "prepare your affairs" from months ago. She was spiraling, pulled down by the undertow of Cale's decline, her own mortality staring her in the face with renewed ferocity. "He leaves behind a legacy," Chloe whispered, her voice rough with tears she refused to shed. Her hand, trembling slightly, reached for Cale's, a skeletal, fragile thing. A story, his perspective, his truth. That's what he leaves behind, Kyle, and it changes the world, even if just for one person. Cale managed a weak smile, a ghost of his former mischievous grin. "Like yours, Professor. You taught me how to tell it." The words hung in the air, a profound benediction. Chloe felt a sudden sharp pain in her side, a spasm that made her gasp. The itching intensified, a maddening frenzy beneath her skin. Her vision blurred, the room tilting. She felt herself teetering on the edge, the brink of collapse. This was it, she thought. This was the final act. But then, as Cale, with a surprising surge of clarity, dictated the final poignant scene of his graphic novel, a single stark image of a vast, star-filled sky, empty yet radiating an inexplicable sense of peace, Chloe felt something shift within her. It wasn't a sudden blinding light or a dramatic chime. It was subtler, almost imperceptible at first. A profound internal shift, like a blockage clearing, a dam breaking. A quiet, deep sigh exhaled from the very core of her being. The maddening itch for a fleeting moment receded. The dull ache in her liver, though still present, felt less insistent, less angry. A wave of cool calm washed over her, an inexplicable surge of energy that left her momentarily breathless. It was a sensation so profound, so utterly foreign to her recent experience, that Chloe dismissed it as a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and grief. She continued to write, helping Cal finalize the last few panels, her mind singularly focused on bringing his vision to life. He drifted in and out of consciousness, but each time he resurfaced, his instructions were clear, his artistic will unwavering. The next morning, the nurses came for Chloe's routine blood work. It was a formality, she knew, a grim tally of her body's ongoing collapse. She expected the numbers to be worse, the markers of liver damage to be even more alarming. She was preparing herself for the inevitable conversation about hospice care, about making peace with the end. Later that afternoon, Dr. Aris, her oncologist, walked into her room, his usual stoic demeanor replaced by a look of utter bewilderment. He held a clipboard, staring at it as if it contained an impossible riddle. "Chloe," he began, his voice carefully neutral. We received your latest labs." Chloe braced herself. "How bad is it, doctor?" He cleared his throat. "Actually, it's quite perplexing. Your liver function markers, they've shown a dramatic, unexpected improvement. Your bilirubin levels are down by almost 30%. Your transaminases have also dropped significantly. It's, well, medically inexplicable, given your trajectory." He pointed to a graph on the clipboard, tracing a line that had previously plummeted into a steep decline, but now showed a distinct, if tentative, uptick. "We've rerun the tests, twice. The results are consistent." Chloe stared at him, then at the graph, a slow dawning of disbelief spreading through her, the quiet shift she had felt yesterday, the surge of inexplicable energy. Could it be connected? It wasn't a complete cure, not a sudden eradication of the beast within, but it was a significant remission, a pause, a reprieve. It meant a chance to resume a more normal life, to step back from the brutal regimen of aggressive chemotherapy. A wave of profound gratitude, so intense it brought tears to her eyes, washed over her. Gratitude not for a miracle, not for a divine intervention, but for the inexplicable resilience of the human body, for the strange symbiotic dance between mind and matter, and for the profound connection she had forged with a young artist who had reminded her what it meant to truly live, even in the face of death. Kel passed away peacefully in his sleep that night, just hours after Chloe had helped him put the finishing touches on his graphic novel. His artistic vision, his story, was complete, and in completing it, he had, in an unexpected and miraculous way, given Chloe the gift of her own continuing story. The silence in his room the next morning was profound, heavy with loss, yet also imbued with a strange, quiet triumph. His light had faded, but in doing so, it had rekindled hers. The sterile air of Cale's hospital room hung heavy, thick with the scent of antiseptic and unspoken goodbyes. The rhythmic hiss and sigh of the ventilator was a counterpoint to the scratching of Chloe's pen against the legal pad, a sound that had become a strange comfort in the past few days. Kyle, his face pale and drawn, a network of tubes disappearing beneath the thin hospital gown, could no longer speak above a whisper, but his eyes, still fiercely bright despite the encroaching shadows, conveyed the urgency of his vision. "The final frame," Kyle rasped, a faint smile touching his lips. "He's standing on the precipice, the city below, a tapestry of light and shadow, not despair, not fear, just acceptance." Chloe scribbled furiously, her own hand trembling. The last 48 hours had been a blur of adrenaline and sorrow. Cale's condition had deteriorated sharply, his breathing shallow, his strength fading with each passing hour. The doctors had gently, regretfully, told his family to prepare, and Chloe, a silent, unwavering sentinel by his bedside, had channeled her grief into a desperate drive to help him complete his artistic legacy. Her own body, already worn thin by her illness and the emotional strain, felt like a brittle cage around her aching heart. The persistent pruritus, which had momentarily receded during her intense focus on Cale's work, had returned with a vengeance, a constant, maddening itch beneath her skin, reminding her of her own failing liver, her own impending fate. Her urine had darkened again, a telltale sign, and a wave of nausea had hit her that morning, leaving her weak and trembling. She could feel the familiar fatigue creeping in, a cold, insidious fog threatening to swallow her. "And the title?" Chloe pressed, her voice thick with unshed tears. "The title of the final panel?" Cale's eyes fluttered, then opened wide, locking onto hers. A profound stillness settled in the room, even the ventilator's rhythm seeming to soften. "The Impossible Palette," he whispered, his voice gaining a sudden, startling clarity. "Because, even at the end, there's still color, still creation." As he spoke those words, a strange sensation bloomed within Chloe. It wasn't a warmth or a sudden burst of light. It was a clearing, a deep internal shift, as if a long-standing obstruction, not just in her bile ducts, but in the very core of her being, had suddenly dissolved. A cool, serene energy seemed to flow through her veins, chasing away the gnawing itch, the bone-deep weariness, the pervasive nausea. Her mind, which had felt clouded and heavy, sharpened with an exhilarating clarity. It was as if her intellectual and emotional engagement with Cale, her selfless dedication to his final creative act, had somehow miraculously created a space within her for healing. The air around them seemed to shimmer, charged with the concentrated energy of their shared creative intensity, a single powerful current flowing between two souls. She looked down at the words she had just written. The Impossible Palette. The ink seemed to glow on the page. She felt a profound sense of peace settle over her, a calm that transcended the sterile room, the beeping machines, and the fragility of life itself. Later that day, after Cale had drifted into a deep, quiet sleep, Chloe found herself in the hospital chapel, the sudden, inexplicable surge of energy still humming beneath her skin. She felt an urge to move, to breathe deeply, to simply be. The next morning, when Dr. Sharma, looking unusually perplexed, stood by her hospital bed, Chloe knew something had changed. "Mrs. Peterson," the doctor began, adjusting her glasses, We ran your routine blood work, and the results are unexpected, to say the least." Chloe's heart hammered, a cautious, almost fearful hope fluttering in her chest. "Your liver enzymes," Dr. Sharma continued, tapping the chart, "your bilirubin levels, your tumor markers, they've all shown a dramatic, almost unprecedented improvement. Your liver function is, well, it's significantly better than we've seen in months. The obstructive jaundice, the severe pruritus, the numbers simply don't align with your previous trajectory, especially given the recent flare-up of your symptoms." Chloe could only stare, her mind struggling to process the words. "But how?" she whispered, the raw emotion catching in her throat. Dr. Sharma shook her head, a bewildered frown on her face. "Medically," she admitted, "we have no explanation. We've reviewed every possible factor, every medication, every parameter. It's inexplicable. It's not a complete cure, Mrs. Peterson, but it's a significant remission, a profound improvement that, frankly, we didn't anticipate. It means we can pause the aggressive chemotherapy and radiation. We'll continue to monitor you closely, of course, but this is remarkable." A wave of relief so profound it made her knees weak washed over Chloe. It wasn't a complete eradication, not a miracle cure in the traditional sense, but it was a reprieve, a second chance. It was life, and she knew with an absolute certainty that defied medical explanation that it was connected to Cale, to the impossible palette they had created together. A few days later, just as the first rays of dawn touched the hospital window, Cale passed away peacefully. Chloe was there, holding his hand, the completed graphic novel manuscript resting on his chest. He had finished his story, and in doing so, he had, in a way no one could have predicted, helped her begin a new chapter of her own. The grief was immense, a sharp, piercing pain, but it was interwoven with a profound gratitude, a quiet wonder. She had witnessed and been part of something extraordinary. The impossible had somehow become real. The sterile air of Cale's hospital room hung heavy, thick with the scent of antiseptic and unspoken goodbyes. The rhythmic hiss and sigh of the ventilator was a counterpoint to the scratching of Chloe's pen against the legal pad, a sound that had become a strange comfort in the past few days. Kyle, his face pale and drawn, a network of tubes disappearing beneath a thin hospital gown, could no longer speak above a whisper. But his eyes, still fiercely bright despite the encroaching shadows, conveyed the urgency of his vision. "The final frame," Kyle rasped, a faint smile touching his lips. "He's standing on the precipice, the city below, a tapestry of light and shadow. Not despair, not fear, just acceptance." Chloe scribbled furiously, her own hand trembling. The last 48 hours had been a blur of adrenaline and sorrow. Cale's condition had deteriorated sharply, his breathing shallow, his strength fading with each passing hour. The doctors had gently, regretfully, told his family there was nothing more to be done. Yet Kyle, with a fierce, almost defiant will, clung to the last threads of his creative purpose. He needed to finish, and Chloe, a silent, unwavering sentinel, was there to help him. Her own body, a cruel echo of his decline, felt heavy and sluggish. The severe pruritus had returned with a vengeance, an internal fire gnawing at her skin. Her urine was dark, her stools pale, and the jaundice had deepened, casting a sallow pallor over her face. Grief was a tangible weight, pressing down on her chest, making each breath an effort. She felt the insidious tendrils of her own illness tightening their grip, reminding her that her reprieve had been temporary, a borrowed season of health. Just as Cal was fading, so too, perhaps, was she. The intellectual stimulation that had momentarily quelled her physical suffering was now intertwined with an unbearable sorrow, activating every nerve ending in her exhausted body. And the light, Cal whispered, his voice barely audible. The light from the city. It's not just electric glow. It's the combined luminescence of all human stories, all the lives lived, the joy, the pain, the triumph, the despair, reflected in his eyes. A faint cough racked his frail body, and Chloe quickly held a cup of water to his lips. He took a tiny sip, then continued, his gaze drifting toward the window, as if seeing the cityscape he described. He's not alone, Cale breathed, his eyes now fixed on Chloe's face, a profound intensity in their depths. He realizes he's part of that light. Always was, always will be, even when the individual flame flickers out. A tear, unbidden, rolled down Chloe's cheek. The weight of his words, of his profound understanding, was almost unbearable. As he spoke, a strange sensation began to ripple through Chloe. It wasn't pain or discomfort, but something entirely new. It started in her core, a warmth that spread outwards, not unlike the feeling of blood returning to a frozen limb, but far more profound. It was as if an internal dam had broken, and a torrent of energy, clean and vibrant, was coursing through her veins. The oppressive itch, for days a constant torment, receded, then vanished entirely, leaving behind a sensation of cool, smooth skin. The metallic taste in her mouth, a constant companion, dissolved. Her vision, previously slightly blurred, sharpened, the hospital room's stark details suddenly vivid. Cale, sensing her stillness, looked at her, a flicker of concern in his eyes. "Chloe, are you all right?" Chloe blinked, trying to process the impossible shift happening within her. Her mind, usually so analytical, struggled to grasp this utterly non-rational experience. "Yes, Cale," she managed, her voice a little shaky, but clearer than it had been in weeks. Just listening. That's beautiful. The human stories, the light." Cal smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile that illuminated his face. "Yes, the living library, right? That's What you always said. Each life, a book. He paused, gathering his remaining strength. And the final panel, his hand, reaching out, not grasping, not pleading, just an open gesture to the light, to the stories. Acceptance. Chloe quickly sketched the image, her hand steady now, imbued with an unfamiliar energy. As her pen drew the last line, Cale's eyes, still locked on hers, seemed to dim, like a candle flame guttering in a sudden draft. A soft sigh escaped his lips, and his head lolled gently to the side. The rhythmic hiss of the ventilator continued for a moment, then a long, drawn-out beep signaled its cessation. He was gone. Chloe sat there, the pen still in her hand. The last image of Cale's open, accepting gesture burned into her mind. Tears streamed down her face, but they were not tears of despair, not entirely. There was an ache, a profound emptiness where Cale's vibrant spirit had been, but also a strange, inexplicable lightness, a clarity. The next morning, the nurses, doing their routine rounds, were surprised to find Chloe not only awake, but sitting upright, reading. She felt, well, not just better, but profoundly, impossibly well. The nurse, a kind woman named Maria, noticed the startling absence of her jaundice. "Mrs. Holloway, are you feeling all right? You look different." Chloe simply nodded, a small, private smile playing on her lips. "I feel reborn, Maria." Later that day, the results of her routine blood tests came back. The medical team was in an uproar. Her bilirubin levels, which had been stubbornly climbing, had plummeted to near normal. Her liver enzymes, previously indicative of severe damage, showed dramatic improvement. In fact, all her markers pointed to a significant, inexplicable remission. Her oncologist, a stoic man who rarely showed emotion, stared at the results with a baffled expression. "Mrs. Holloway," he said, his voice laced with disbelief. "Medically speaking, this is impossible. Your trajectory was clear. There's no explanation for this kind of reversal." Lena, who had rushed to the hospital after receiving the call, wept with relief, clinging to Chloe. Elias, usually so composed, openly shed tears, his face a mixture of wonder and gratitude. Chloe, however, felt a poignant, bittersweet ache. Kyle was gone, but he had left her with something more profound than she could ever have imagined. He had given her not just a reason to live, but a way to live. The creative energy, the selfless intellectual engagement, the profound connection that transcended their illness. It had not just distracted her, it had, in some unfathomable way, healed her. The miracle was not a divine intervention, but the body's unexpected, almost symbiotic response to an intense, selfless intellectual and emotional engagement with another human being. It was the living proof that the human spirit, when fully engaged, could orchestrate wonders that defied all medical logic.